Ready to jump into daily English conversation? We're looking at practical tips from the Happy Home podcast. And you know what? You don't need to know like every single word in the dictionary to sound fluent.
It's so true. Studies show that just 2,000 words make up 80% of daily conversations.
Wow.
That's what we're kind of unpacking today, those essential building blocks. Greetings, small talk, polite requests, the kind of phrases you'll find everywhere.
Yeah, from a coffee shop to asking for directions.
Exactly.
I was amazed by that 80% figure. Makes fluency seem way less intimidating, right?
Oh, for sure.
And Happy Home Podcast breaks it down into these really handy categories. Every conversation starts with a greeting.
Exactly. You got your classic, hi, how are you? But they also mention casual things like, what's up? Or how's it going?
Right.
It's interesting how these simple phrases kind of set the tone for the whole interaction.
And it's fascinating because they point out, how's it going? And
Yeah.
isn't it really an invitation to, tell your life story? It's more of a social signal, a way to acknowledge someone without, diving into a deep conversation.
Totally. You hit the nail on the head. It's like a little verbal handshake.
Yeah.
What I think is interesting is the role of small talk. Happy Home Podcast really dives into why it's so important, even if it feels a little awkward sometimes.
Oh, yeah. I used to think small talk was just filler.
Right.
But they're saying it's like a vital skill for building connections.
Yeah.
Makes sense when you think about those classic phrases like, nice weather today, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or, busy day.
Yeah.
They're not just about the weather or your schedule, right?
Right.
It's about finding common ground.
Exactly. These phrases act as bridges, conversational bridges.
I like that.
They ease you into deeper topics and build that sense of, rapport. And this is where it gets really interesting. They point out the crucial role of please and thank you in polite requests. These are more than just magic words, right?
Totally. It's easy to forget them when you're focusing on getting, the rest of the sentence right.
Right.
But the podcast emphasizes how these small words demonstrate respect and make the whole interaction smoother.
It's really interesting how such simple phrases can have such a big impact on, how you are perceived,
Oh, yeah.
especially in a new culture. Even just saying goodbye has these cultural nuances.
Right. Like how Happy Home Podcast points out that have a great day is so common in American English. They use it after almost any interaction, even if you just ask for directions, which isn't always the case in other cultures.
It's a great example of how those phrases go beyond the literal meaning. It's about leaving a positive impression and, reinforcing that sense of friendliness, which is so characteristic of American culture. But what I found helpful were those role-playing scenarios they have, ordering coffee and asking for directions.
Yeah.
It's one thing to learn phrases, but hearing them used in context is a game changer.
I totally agree. In that coffee shop scene, they break down phrases like, can I get? And would you like?
Right.
It seems so simple, but it's about using the right language. It's not just grammar, it's social fluency.
Exactly. Can I get a latte? Sounds so much more natural and polite than I want a latte.
Oh, absolutely.
And in the directions scenario, they show those essential phrases for politely asking for help
Right.
and making sure you understand the directions. They even highlight how Americans add that have a great day at the end. Again, just further showing those cultural things.
But they don't just focus on getting it right. They also talk about common mistakes that learners make, which I thought was reassuring because I've definitely made some of these myself.
Of course, we all have.
Like forgetting please and thank you.
Yeah.
Or making sentences too complicated when a simpler one would work just fine.
Yeah. It's so easy to get caught up in grammar and forget the practical side of communication.
Right.
But I like how Happy Home Podcast doesn't just point these out. They give you advice for fixing them.
Yes.
Like their tip to practice with native speakers through, YouTube or podcasts. It's not just passively listening. It's about immersing yourself
Right.
in real life English.
And they even suggest specific resources, which is great.
Yeah, they want to equip listeners to succeed. But what stood out to me was their focus on pronunciation. They actually give a quick tip for one of the trickier phrases, which is so valuable because sometimes it's those tiny sounds that trip us up.
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
Good pronunciation is key to being understood and feeling confident.
For sure. But they also emphasize the importance of confidence itself, right? They even tell this funny story about a miscommunication.
Yes, that's what makes it so relatable. It normalizes making mistakes. It reminds us that even, fluent speakers have those awkward moments.
Yeah.
And it's all about learning from them. And I love how they encourage listeners to go out of their comfort zone and actually use these phrases They're all about taking action.
That's the key, right? It's one thing to understand these phrases, but it's another to use them.
Yeah.
They challenge listeners to include these in their daily interactions, like making it a fun game.
Absolutely. And they even suggest sharing your experiences
Yes.
on social media or emailing them with stories. It's about building a community around learning, which is so motivating.
It's not just mastering phrases, it's connecting and sharing your journey.
Right, exactly.
That's what makes the Happy Home podcast so good.
Yeah.
It's not just about teaching, but creating the space where learners can connect and grow.
So we've got greetings, small talk, those all-important pleases and thank yous, even touched on cultural nuances like that. Have a great day.
Right.
But before we go deeper, I want to ask you this. Why are these seemingly simple phrases so important for mastering everyday English? What makes them the foundation?
It is fascinating. Yeah, those phrases are the base, before you can build the rest of the house. Those basic phrases let us move into more, complex stuff, right?
Exactly. It's like they give you that confidence. And speaking of more complex stuff, Happy Home Podcast talks about nonverbal cues. It's not just what you say, but how you say it.
Exactly. Like a simple smile can totally change how a conversation feels.
Right.
They say a smile makes you seem more open, more friendly, which helps a lot when you're trying to connect with someone, especially in a new language.
Yeah, it's like that universal language of, warmth and being open. A smile can do what words sometimes can't.
That's a good point.
And they talk about eye contact, too.
Oh, yeah.
Like it shows you're engaged and listening.
It shows you're present, not just physically, but mentally, too. And that leads to another thing. They highlight active listening. It's one thing to hear someone, but it's another to really get what they're saying.
I love how they describe active listening like you're a detective. You're not just hearing words, but you're looking for clues in their tone, their body language, even those little pauses.
Yeah, you're going deeper, trying to understand the meaning behind the words. And they have some good tips for getting better at it, like nodding your head to show you're following along and asking questions to be sure you understand.
Right? Those are so simple, but they work. It shows the other person you're really trying to get their point of view.
Exactly. It makes the conversation a real exchange, not just one person talking.
Totally.
Yeah.
And what about, changing your style, depending on who you're talking to?
Yeah,
We don't talk to our boss the same way we talk to our best friend, right?
that's a great point. Like, the podcast gives the example of slang.
Oh, yeah, good one.
What's okay with friends might not be okay at work. It's about reading the situation and adjusting your language.
Yeah, like having the right tools and knowing which one to use.
Exactly.
And that's especially important when things get a little awkward.
Oh, yeah, we've all been there.
Like when someone interrupts you. I used to totally freeze up.
Oh, yeah.
But Happy Home Podcast suggests just acknowledging it and then smoothly getting back on topic.
It takes practice, but it keeps things from going off the rails.
For sure.
And they talk about silences, too. We feel like we have to fill every silence, but they say silences can actually be good.
Right. Sometimes a pause lets you think and even makes the conversation feel closer. But of course, there are times when you want to change the subject. If it gets too personal or uncomfortable.
And they give you some nice ways to do that, like, speaking of which, or, that reminds me.
Right. It's smooth.
You can move to something else without being rude.
Totally. What I thought was really interesting was their focus on how different cultures communicate. It's something we don't always think about, but it matters a lot.
No, it does. It's like what's polite in one culture might not be in another. They talk about how some cultures are very direct and others are more indirect. It's amazing how culture shapes how we talk.
It's true. It's like that saying lost in translation.
Exactly.
It's not just the words, it's the unspoken rules too.
They really say you need to be aware of these differences so you don't have misunderstandings. They suggest learning a bit about the cultures you interact with, things like body language, tone of voice, how formal to be. It shows respect and that you're willing to understand.
And it's not just about reading about it. It's
Yeah.
watching how people act, picking up on those little clues. They even say it's okay to ask questions if you're not sure about something.
Oh, yeah, it's better to ask than to guess wrong and maybe offend someone.
Totally. And what about humor? I mean, it could be such a good way to break the ice.
It can lighten things up, create a connection, but they say to be careful about what kind of humor you use, especially with people from other cultures.
True.
What you think is funny might not be funny to someone else. They recommend sticking to things like observational humor or jokes about yourself at first.
Yeah, it's safer.
It's a way to see what their sense of humor is like without, accidentally being offensive.
That's a good point. And they also say don't be afraid to laugh at yourself.
Oh, yeah. Shows you're relaxed and not too serious.
Exactly.
Ooh.
But they also have advice on just being a better communicator in general. not just learning phrases.
They talk about those basic things that always matter, like being clear, being concise, and telling stories. They say it's not just about perfect grammar, it's about getting your message across in a way that people understand and remember.
And they really believe in the power of stories.
Oh, yeah.
Stories can make you feel things, make connections, and help people relate to what you're saying, more than just stating facts.
It's about keeping your audience interested and making them remember what you said.
Right.
They say to practice telling stories, work on the structure, using vivid details and how you deliver it. It's like anything else, the more you do it, the better you get.
Yeah, it's about finding your voice and sharing it with the world.
Exactly.
But they also say you need to be aware of how you communicate.
Self-awareness.
Yeah, like noticing your own patterns and seeing what you can improve.
They suggest recording yourself talking or asking friends for feedback.
Good ideas.
It's about always trying to get better.
Yeah, communication is like a journey. You never really arrive. You're always learning.
It's true. And it's a journey worth taking.
Absolutely. We've covered a lot in this part. Nonverbal cues, active listening, cultural differences, humor, and getting better overall.
A lot of good stuff.
What really stood out to you? What were some key things that you'll remember?
Let me think.
It's crazy how much goes into communication, right?
Right.
You think it's just words, but it's way more than that. It's those little things, the body language, the cultural stuff, all those layers of meaning. But knowing all that is one thing, using it is where it gets real. And that's what we're looking at now in this final part of our deep dive into daily English.
Yeah, it's like we have all the parts for a great meal. Now we got to cook. And Happy Home Podcast shows us how to do it. They take all those great tips and show how to use them for real.
They go deeper with those role-playing things we talked about. Remember ordering coffee and asking directions?
Right.
They give you options for different situations.
Right.
Like they thought about all the what-ifs you might have.
I notice how they change the phrases based on who you're talking to. Like you wouldn't talk to your boss the same way you talk to a friend. They show you how to get the tone right.
It's like a cheat sheet for tough social situations. They even have tips for things that make everyone nervous, like making complaints or disagreeing politely.
It's about being clear but still being nice. They give you phrases and ways to handle those talks so you get your point across but don't offend anyone.
Yeah, those are the times you really need to get the words right. And their advice makes it seem easier. What I found helpful was what they said about using humor the right way. Humor can connect people, but they say to be careful about when you use it.
Yeah, you gotta know when it's okay and when it's not. They have examples of jokes that work anywhere and some that only work in certain cultures. It shows that humor is tricky and you gotta be aware.
Like they're teaching us to be funny, but in a way that respects everyone. And speaking of respect, Happy Home Podcast doesn't avoid the hard parts of talking to people from different cultures. It's a big deal in the world today.
Oh yeah, we're gonna run into those differences and sometimes it causes problems, but the podcast gives us ways to handle it.
They're big on really listening, understanding other people, and learning about their cultures. It's more than just phrases, it's getting those deeper values that shape how people talk.
What helped me were their ideas for dealing with those differences. Things like watching how people act, paying attention to what they do not just say, and asking if you don't get something.
Yeah, like becoming a culture detective, trying to figure out the rules that aren't written down. It's being respectful and really wanting to understand the other person.
For sure. And they also say you need to adjust how you talk to match the culture of the person you're with. It's not about changing who you are, it's about making sure you communicate well.
It's knowing that both people need to try to understand each other. But even with all this advice, it comes down to practice, right? Using these skills in the real world.
Practice is key. Happy Home Podcast wants people to find ways to talk more. It could be with anyone, friends, family, coworkers, even people you don't know. The more you do it, the easier it gets.
Like anything, the more you use it, the better you get. And they even say to join groups, go to events, volunteer in your community, put yourself out there and use your English.
Get out of the textbook and into the real world. But they also say to be patient.
Yeah, learning a language and how to talk, well, takes time. Don't get discouraged. If you mess up, celebrate what you're doing right, learn from mistakes, and keep going. That's how you get fluent.
And they remind you that the journey is fun. It's not just the end goal. It's about enjoying, learning, growing, and connecting with people. And that's the best part of Happy Home Podcast. They want you to see that communication is more than just saying things. It's about making friends, understanding each other, and being yourself.
It's like every conversation is a chance to connect with someone, to learn something, to make things better.
They want you to go into every conversation wanting to get the other person to listen to them and to care about what they're saying. It's about seeing everyone as a person and using talking to bring us closer.
That's a beautiful thought. Communication can change our lives and the world around us. So as we finish this deep dive, I want you to think about this. What if you saw every conversation, even the small ones, as a chance to connect, to learn, and to make things a bit better?
It's a big challenge, right? But if we see talking as a way to connect and understand each other, who knows what we can do? Maybe we can even inspire other people.
And that's it. We've looked at those important phrases, the subtle stuff, the cultural things that can help you talk to anyone in English. This isn't the end, though. It's just the start of your journey to fluency and beyond.
Go out there, use what you learned, and connect with people. It's amazing what good communication can do.